Welcome back to our news bulletin. We start from Brazil, where the death toll from COVID-19 has neared 40,000 after 1,274 people died in the last 24 hours. Mexico has reported 708 fatalities overnight, taking the tally to over 15,000. Meanwhile, in the U.S., the countrywide death toll has reached nearly 113,000. Worldwide, the death count has crossed 416,000, while infections are over 7.3 million. Further details in this report.
As President Donald Trump pushes to reopen all sectors of the economy, experts say the U.S. may see 200,000 deaths from COVID-19 by September. Meanwhile, the Pan Health American organization has warned that June will be a crucial month for Latin America, where death count has crossed 70,000. Mexico City Mayor Claudia Sheinbaum says the capital will embark on a large-scale testing effort as the centerpiece of its plan to reopen its economy. But in Brazil, Sao Paulo Mayor Bruno Covas said he has decided to allow street shops and real estate brokers to open on restricted hours.
The city is still under quarantine. I hope that soon we can celebrate having defeated the virus. But now with the rates, it is possible to start the opening, but the fight continues.
Europe is set to reopen its border as the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development warns the Eurozone's GDP is expected to plunge 11.5%. Austria too will partially open up its borders beginning on June 16th, while Greece will allow tourists to fly to Athens from June 15th. Meanwhile, France has announced to end special government powers brought in to deal with the pandemic on July 10th.
We see well that today's health conditions are extremely different from what we have lived through in March or even from May 11. It's these health conditions that have evolved that have led the government today to announce the end of the state of health emergency.
In Asia, Thailand has reported no new coronavirus infections or deaths in the past 24 hours. It is the first time in nearly 3 weeks that no new cases were reported and the 17th day without local transmission.
Meanwhile, Pakistan has recorded its highest single-day surge in COVID-19 cases as nearly 6,000 people tested positive, increasing the tally to over 119,000. The health ministry says 101 people died due to the virus in the past 24 hours, raising the toll to 2,356. The ministry said over 38,000 patients of coronavirus have recovered so far. It said the province of Punjab has reported over 45,000 cases so far, while Sindh has nearly 44,000 cases. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa has over 15,000 cases now, and Balochistan has 7,335. The capital city Islamabad has reported 6,236 cases, while Gilgit-Baltistan and AJK have reported over 1,500 cases. Moving on, the UN says more than 70 civilians have been killed and several others wounded in a raid in Nigeria's northeastern Borno state. In a report, UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said the motorized armed group also stole a herd of more than 1,000 cattle in the Gubbio area. The report said gunmen targeted the funeral for the victims and also set their houses ablaze. The office said local hunters were deployed to protect the town with the military support in response to persistent violence by armed groups. It said the latest attacks are the deadliest in Borno state since July 2019. No group has claimed responsibility for the bloodshed, but militant groups of Boko Haram and ISIS are active in the region. The UN says Libya's warring sides are fully engaged in military talks aimed at ending the fighting in the country. The UN mission in Libya called the virtual meeting of Joint Military Commission productive. The mission said it held a meeting with Eastern Army on June 3rd as well as one with the Libyan government delegation on Tuesday. It said they discussed the rough ceasefire agreement presented by the mission to the parties in February. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has welcomed the resumptions of talks between the UN and Libyan parties. In a press conference in Washington, Pompeo urged speedy negotiations to achieve a ceasefire. He said the quick and good faith talks are now required to implement a truce. Ethiopia's parliament has allowed Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to stay in office beyond his mandate after August elections were postponed due to COVID-19. The parliament voted with 114 in favor, 4 against and 1 abstention for the approval. The House of Federation has also approved to extend the term of all assemblies until health institutions say the threat from coronavirus is over. Lawmakers have yet not decided when to hold the new elections. A Katyusha rocket has landed inside Baghdad's heavily fortified green zone. Witnesses say they heard a loud blast followed by sirens from the U.S. Embassy in the zone. The rocket was reportedly launched from nearby Al-Shab International Stadium in Baghdad. A military statement confirmed the attack. No one has claimed responsibility for the attack yet. The rocket attack comes ahead of strategic dialogue between the U.S. and Iraq scheduled to begin today. U.S. Undersecretary David Hale will lead the discussion with the representatives from the Department of Defense, Treasury, Energy, and other agencies. At the United Nations, Pakistan has urged the international community to hold India accountable for its war crimes in the occupied Kashmir. Speaking at the UN Economic and Social Council, Pakistan's envoy Munir Akram said India is involved in grave human rights violations in the valley. He urged the world community to take notice of India's breaches of international humanitarian law. Akram said hundreds of Kashmiri political leaders and abducted youth continue to languish in crowded jails across India. He said Indian acts have made them vulnerable to the coronavirus. India has turned down a travel request for members of a U.S. government panel seeking to review its religious freedom. Foreign Minister Subramaniam Jaishankar said such foreign agencies have no standing to assess the constitutional rights of citizens. This comes after the U.S. criticized India's annexation of occupied Kashmir, the racist Citizenship Amendment Act, and the National Register of Citizens. Since taking power in 2014, the Indian government has faced global criticism for attacks on Muslims. The panel had dubbed India a country of particular concern regarding religious freedom. Earlier, India had denied entry to British MP Debbie Abrahams to prevent her from assessing the human rights situation in the occupied Kashmir. The Taliban have released another 8 soldiers and policemen of the Kabul administration from prison in Zabul province. The two sides have expedited the prisoner swap agreed under Doha deal to pave way for the intra-Afghan dialogue. In a tweet, Taliban spokesperson Sohail Shaheen said the prisoners were sent to their families after giving them new clothes and transportation fare. U.S. Special Representative Zalmay Khalilzad recently visited Qatar, Pakistan and Afghanistan and held important meetings to set the stage for intra-Afghan dialogue. Afghan Chief of High Council for National Reconciliation, Abdullah, also said Qatar is expected to host the talks soon. The U.S. CENTCOM Commander General Kenneth McKenzie says he cannot recommend a full withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan. In a video conference, General McKenzie said the Taliban will have to demonstrate they no longer support al-Qaeda forces in Afghanistan. General McKenzie said the Taliban are yet to fulfill their obligations under the Peace Pact with the U.S. He said the threat to the United States is not the Taliban, but the entities they allow to live in Afghanistan. The U.S. is currently on track to reduce troops to 8,600 by next month if conditions under the Peace Pact are met by the Taliban. Last week, a UN report accused the Taliban of maintaining ties with the al-Qaeda despite assurances to the contrary. We're now taking a short break, but stay tuned for more news. Welcome back. Largely peaceful demonstrations continue across dozens of U.S. cities on the 16th consecutive day in the aftermath of George Floyd's custodial death. One individual was injured in Virginia as protesters pulled down a Confederate monument in Portsmouth. This report has details.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi called for a removal of 11 Confederate statues from the Capitol as Floyd's brother testified in the Congress. But President Donald Trump says he will not even consider renaming military bases named for Confederate generals. The White House says it will present a police reform proposal in coming days, but ruled out reducing immunity for cops.
One thing that AG Barr said was that in the Democrat bill, they talked about needing to reduce immunity to go after bad cops, but that would result in police pulling back. So that is one thing that is a non-starter.
So is that, it's called qualified immunity.
Yes.
Is that a red line for the president?
That's a non-starter in the Democrat legislation. Yes, John.
In Minnesota, a statue of the Italian explorer Christopher Columbus was beheaded, while protesters in Washington, Boston, and New York called for defunding the police. Speaking at a White House briefing, Kayleigh McEnany said administration plans to address protester concerns about police brutality are reaching final edits.
The president has spent the last 10 days quietly and diligently working on proposals to address the issues that the protesters have raised across the country, legitimate issues. And that body of work, I'm told, is reaching its final edits, and we hope to produce it for you in the coming days. I can't promise you it's tomorrow, but in the coming days, we look to deliver that.
Elsewhere, motor racing company NASCAR has banned the Confederate flag that is considered a symbol of slavery and racism. Meanwhile, tech giant Amazon announced a one-year moratorium on police departments' use of its facial recognition software.
Activists have drawn up a hit list of 60 monuments in the United Kingdom that celebrate slavery and racism. They suggested it was up to local communities to decide what statues they want in their areas. Let's find out more in this report.
A wave of anti-racism protests sweeping across the United States and Europe has reignited a debate about monuments glorifying Britain's imperialistic past. Thousands defied social distancing rules to gather at Oxford University and demand the removal of a statue of 19th century British colonialist Cecil Rhodes.
Rhodes represents such a violent legacy of colonialism, imperialism, slavery, particularly in Southern Africa, and the values that he represents are not the values that we stand by and not the values that we think should be celebrated in this community in Oxford. And so, you know, the beginning is to take down a statue that celebrates that so that we can continue to decolonize the university.
Meanwhile, in Leeds, a statue of Queen Victoria has been sprayed with graffiti, including the words murderer and slave owner. The bronze sculpture on Woodhouse Moor in the Hyde Park area of the city also had the words colonizer and racist daubed on it. Meanwhile, a statue of 18th century British slave owner Robert Milligan was removed from outside the Museum of London Docklands. The action followed a decision by Mayor Sadiq Khan to review London's landmarks to reflect the city's diversity.
So this is our contribution from the East End to show solidarity to our brother George Floyd, who was brutally killed in the US, and the movement that's happening throughout the world with Black Lives Matter. East End has a history of standing up against injustice and inequality. And this is our mark by removing a slaver, Robert Milligan, who used to own 526 slaves when he died in 1809.
On Sunday, the statue of slave trader Edward Colston was torn down and thrown into the harbor by protesters in Bristol.
In the U.S., seasonal wildfires have broken out around Los Angeles amid scorching temperatures and fierce Santa Ana winds. Los Angeles Fire Department said about 200 firefighters and 4 water-dropping helicopters are fighting the blaze. Officials at the rescue services have contained 25% of the fire near the famed Getty Center Museum. Authorities said firefighters put out 2 other fires in Ventura in north of Los Angeles. The so-called Elizabeth fire scorched 50 acres of land, while another fire in Thousand Oaks area was quickly extinguished. Ford Motor Company of the US and Volkswagen of Germany have signed an agreement to expand their global cooperation on developing mid-size pickup trucks. Both car makers announced their companies will also cooperate on the development of commercial and electric vehicles. Volkswagen Group CEO Herbert Diess said it is vital to set up alliances between strong companies amid COVID-19 and its impacts on the global economy. He said the collaboration will reduce development costs and allow a broader distribution of vehicles. By 2023, Ford will build a new electric vehicle for the European market, which will be based on Volkswagen's modular electric drive toolkit. Both companies said more than 600,000 units can be produced by Ford in such a way over the years. European stock markets have plummeted as investors digest US Federal Reserve's latest outlook on the economy. A dip in travel stocks and some other sectors are weighing down the regional stocks. CAC 40 in Paris is trading over 3% lower. Frankfurt's DAX has lost nearly 3% as the airliner Lufthansa stocks fell 7.5%. London's FTSE 100 is also trading over 2.5% lower. In Asia, Nikkei 225 led the losses, closing nearly 3% lower, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index lost over 2%. Seoul's Kospi and Shanghai Composite closed nearly 1% lower. Meanwhile, international benchmark Brent crude oil price lost over 3%. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.